Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Hey, thank you so much for joining us here on our YouTube channel for episode number 963. Well, let's talk philanthropy today, everybody. We are going to be talking with Alex Morse from Growing Hope Globally, all about international efforts to help the over 80% of the world's poor who are involved in farming. Subsistence farming for the most part, and who are just trying to eke out a living, like a legitimate bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs living, food, shelter, and clothing, off of the piece of land they have available to them. And it's a really interesting interview about the conditions where a lot of these folks farm and a lot of the challenges they face and what's being done, being very innovative in being done to help these folks farm and improve their farming practices. Now, anytime somebody reaches out to me and they want to come on the show and they want to promote a program or a 501c3 or something like Growing Hope Globally, I'm always very skeptical when I get that first request, especially if I'm not familiar with the organization. So I expect that you're probably the same way as me. So I want to let you know before we start this interview that after getting the request from Alex to come on the show, I did my research. He's going to be talking about a curriculum that they've developed for the FFA, for an SAE project that can be done either chapter-wide or by an individual to help in these efforts. He's going to be talking about that. And so what I did before ever agreeing to do the interview is I did contact the National FFA. I spoke with the people I know there, talked with them about Growing Hope Globally, and they told me, yes, we do indeed work with them, and they're a legitimate organization, and they gave me nothing but positive remarks about Growing Hope Globally. So I want you to know that I did do this research before having Alex on the show, and did that background investigation, I guess, if you will, to make sure that this is a reputable non-profit organization, Christian-based organization that I will be profiling here on the show. So I feel very good about doing this, and it is very, very interesting information, and we are going to get that started for you right now. Alex, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. I'm really excited to get to chat with you today.
Well, good. I am looking forward to it, and yeah, you're doing some you and your people are doing some very, very interesting stuff, and I'm eager to share it with everybody. And it's funny. Normally, I do all my FFA stuff on my Monday or my Wednesday episodes. I'm going to publish this on one of my Friday episodes, but I feel what you're doing is it involves the FFA, it involves SAEs, but it transcends all of that too. And it kind of reminds us about the need for help with agriculture around the world. And I've been exposed to this before. This is something I've thought about maybe later in life, going and taking whatever knowledge I've got and sharing it in places where they need it. But you're already doing it firsthand. You're involved in it. So I'm really eager to share it. Let's do this. Let's have you introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us about you and your background and what you do.
Yeah, so my name is Alex Morse. I work with a nonprofit called Growing Hope Globally. I'm the regional director of Latin American and Caribbean overseas programs. And it's kind of funny that I work in agriculture now, or agricultural development, because I really don't come from an agricultural background at all myself. I grew up in Seattle, and then my family moved out to Indiana, and I remember 15 going to a county fair for the first time and seeing a pig and being surprised that they're not as smooth as they might look like when they come out as Christmas hams or something like that.
Okay.
And after living in Indiana, I had the opportunity to volunteer for a year down in the Dominican Republic. And I was actually working with urban poverty. I was working with kids that were living on the street. And what struck me was that almost every single kid that we worked with, their family had migrated from a rural area to the city because of a lack of food or because of a lack of job opportunity. And so it made me really curious in what was happening, in those rural parts of the country. And after about a year there, I had the opportunity to travel and work with another organization that was doing international agricultural development in some of those rural parts. And it just blew my mind. I met a guy named Juan who had been dependent on food aid, right? So he would he would every day have to go to this food kitchen in order to get a meal prepared by somebody else for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And within 2 years, he had improved his yields enough to be able to sell his own crop back to that same food kitchen to provide for other people. And I think that's what's so exciting about agriculture. There's so few places where you can plant a seed or plant something and have it be multiplied dozens of times over, right? It's just a tremendous opportunity. There's a great quote from the guy that wrote Gulliver's Travels that said, "Anyone who can make 2 seeds of corn grow where before only one was harvested has done more good for the world than all the politicians combined." I just love that quote. If people are able to have the dignity of providing for themselves, that just opens up so many more opportunities. So, sorry, I ran on a little bit on your question, but I just really love the opportunity that agriculture provides.
Mm-hmm.
It really makes sense that we focus on agriculture because about 80% of the world's hungry people actually are farmers or live in rural areas. So that's what they're already doing. They just don't necessarily have the tools, or like you mentioned, the training. A lot of times that information is just not available to them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's amazing the difference that the right program and the right support and the right encouragement can make in somebody's life.
Absolutely. Now, what do you do for your full-time living?
Yeah, so for full-time living, this is my full-time job. I work in international agricultural development. About half the time, in a typical year, about half the time I'd be traveling and speaking with FFA chapters, speaking with church groups that support our work, reaching out to farmers that might be interested in getting involved. About the other half of the time, I'm visiting international programs, not just to make sure that the money that we send is being well spent, but to make sure that their programs are really encouraging people to work towards self-sufficiency, right? Making sure that we're aligned on some of those goals. It's one thing to just provide handouts. It's another thing to provide people that dignity of being able to provide for themselves. So we're kind of going and just kind of reinforcing that message on our international trips. Also, students and donors are able to travel with me. So on those international trips, it's kind of building relationship with the partner, but also kind of helping interpret what people are seeing, especially when it's a context or culture or situation that's just so totally different from our own, right?
Okay. Now, is Growing Hope Globally, is that your full-time employer? Or am I misunderstanding this?
Yep. Growing Hope Globally is my full-time employer.
Okay.
So I'm on the road. In a typical year, I'd be on the road about 200 days out of the year.
Wow.
This year, obviously, has been a little different for us, but it's been nice. My wife and I recently had a daughter, so we've been able to be home.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, so, in this episode, I want to do 2 things. I want to talk about the SAE curriculum, the Supervised Agricultural Experience curriculum that Growing Hope Globally has available for chapters, and this concept of a chapter-wide SAE, which is very interesting to me as well. But I also want to touch on, for all of our people out there that are listening that have, immense knowledge in one area or more of agriculture, how that can be used at some point in life to go do philanthropic good and help people in the rest of the world. And so I want to touch on both of those, but let's start off like this. Tell everybody what Growing Hope Globally is, and what the foundations for it are, what you believe in, all of that.
Yeah, so Growing Hope Globally started just over 20 years ago. We were founded by a guy in the FFA Hall of Fame in Ohio, Vernon Sloan, and his wife, Carol. He was a farmer up in Northwest Ohio, out of Stryker, Ohio. And he had served in the military and had been stationed in the Philippines when he was younger. And he had this recollection of watching children comb through the dump looking for food. Years later, he was at home watching TV and he saw famine in Western Africa, and he really wanted to respond. And he happened to be a hog farmer, and he was growing high lysine corn. And high lysine corn is a really nutritious product. It's meant for fattening hogs. And he thought, well, shoot, if it's good for fattening hogs, it'd probably be good for people that are undernourished as well. And so he started working to see what it would take to ship a container full of high lysine corn to another part of the world, right? And the first year he kind of did it on his own, and then the next year he kind of invited his neighbors in, right? Like, we all harvest and all donate a little bit and put it towards something good. Let's see what we can do. Well, the stumbling block was for them to ship about $7,000 worth of corn. It cost them about $70,000, right? It just didn't make sense. And then the other part of it is a lot of times when you ship food, it might get to a harbor and sit there while they wait to get permission to unload it or screen it. So you end up with a lot of waste there. And then if you're trying to help farmers, the last thing you want to do is dump a lot of grain into the market. That lowers prices, right? And then the local farmers are usually hit with the disaster after the disaster. And so a number of Christian organizations saw what Vernon was doing. They saw that farmers are really passionate about responding to hunger. And they decided to come together and form an ecumenical organization. At the time, it was called Foods Resource Bank. Now we're called Growing Hope Globally. But what we do is we just invite American communities to come together to pool their resources and to work together in what we call a growing project. There's some with livestock, there's some with dairies, there's some with farmers markets, there's some with field crops. But in general, like, the most common one would be with corn or soybeans, right? And a church might reach out to a farmer and say, hey, would you be willing to designate 10 acres of your field for this project? And if the farmer agrees to do that, a committee would kind of join around him, a team would form around him. They might reach out to some of the input dealers, local elevator, the seed dealer, try and get those inputs donated, right? And then at the end of the year, they harvest the crop and sell it. And instead of sending the grain overseas, we're sending the funding from the sale of the grain overseas. And that allows us to respond to hunger in a much more sustainable way. Instead of waiting for people to suffer, we're able to respond ahead of time with training and empowerment programs, right? We're able to hopefully help build communities up so they never get into that crisis mode where they might have to migrate or they might suffer extreme hunger. And so that's been kind of our founding. Again, that was a little over 20 years ago. Since then, we've been able to reach over 2 million people with sustainable ag training programs. Currently, we're working in about just under 30 different countries. And we work through local partner organizations that are brought to us through our Christian partners. So we work with all denominations, and we really focus on what unites us, which is, we all feel that we're called by our faith or by our own personal convictions to respond to hunger in the world. And this is just a great way to do that.
Okay. Now, when you say the farmer is selling the crop and sending the funding, are you sending cash, or when you say sending the funding, are you sending people and resources that are being paid for with that cash?
So it depends a little bit on the context of which country, which program, but in general, we're sending the cash. There's local partners that we work with. Many of them have agronomists that have trained at local agricultural universities. And so they're really, we found they're really the best people to provide that training to the local farmer. They have experience working with crops that I just don't even know where we'd find an American expert to work on it with, right? For example, in Peru right now, we're working on an Incan variety of lupin that's edible. Another crop, tarwi, that doesn't even really have a translation for what it is. Oca, which is a type of yam, and then some rare high altitude varieties of quinoa, barley, potatoes. And so being able to have somebody that studied at a university that's 14,000 feet above sea level, they're able to work with those crops, gain that experience, and they're able to be there for a longer period of time. We found that one of the most important things with working with farmers is being able to be there with them for the long haul, right? There's so much out of your control with farming. You might have a great plan. You might set up the perfect plant spacing. You might pick the right crop and everything like that. But if the rains don't come when you need the rains to come, there's just not much
Mm-hmm.
that you can do about it. And that's where we feel we're just incredibly fortunate to have the support of farmers in the U.S. behind these programs, because they get it, right? They know that you can do your part, but there's part that you aren't able to be in control of.
Mm-hmm.
And so we find local partners because they're already there. They're well trained. They have the specific skills that are really needed, and then they're able to really build confidence and trust in ways that we wouldn't be able to. I mean, also I don't speak Quechua, I don't speak Mosquito, I don't speak Maya Mom or Maya Shiel. So having local partners that can get through all those cultural and language barriers and build trust is really important too.
Mm-hmm.
But what we do also support is evaluations or external evaluations for our visits, where we go in as kind of a critical friend, I would say, is how I describe it. Just asking questions. Sometimes it's really helpful to have that external perspective, right? And so a lot of times we'll have American farmers go with us. To be honest, sometimes I've seen so many different fields in so many different countries. Sometimes things just don't strike me as being worth asking questions on. And so to have an American farmer with me that really has a great understanding of why he does his practices those ways, asks those questions, and can sometimes really spark a new idea. Also, to have an American farmer go and see another farm in another country, just every time there's this connection, like farmers just somehow recognize each other regardless of language barrier, cultural differences, or anything like that. And I can't think of a trip where we've been overseas, been in a field, and everybody leaves with their hands clean, right? At some point, everybody's picking up a dirt clod and seeing what the soil content is and stuff like that, and asking those kinds of questions. So our role with those visits is mainly to just really be encouraging, really to help ask some of those questions and maybe encourage them to try something new or think about something a little differently. I know one of the things that you're really big on is that entrepreneurial mindset, right?
Right.
That's just culturally, it's just not something you see in a lot of other places.
Mm-hmm.
So it's another opportunity also that partners that we work with really promote that entrepreneur mindset, but to have American farmers come and reinforce that as well, I think is really, really helpful, because changing your farming practices is a huge risk, right? If you're barely getting by and somebody asks you to start changing your planting distances, or maybe not burning your field before you plant, not clearing the weeds out, that's a big change. That's a big risk. Every American farmer I know, when they're asked to make a change like that, they look to see if maybe one of their neighbors will do it first, right?
Sure, yeah.
So the encouragement's a really important piece. I don't want to discount that in any way.
So Growing Hope Globally, are you a 501c3?
Yes, we're a 501c3. We're a registered nonprofit.
Okay. And so that means that you've got people donating and contributing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the reason I'm asking, and the reason I'm asking about if you're sending cash or if you're sending resources like in kind or something like that, is because if somebody is going to donate, I think they want to have a good feeling that they're not throwing good money after bad, meaning that money, it doesn't leave your hands and go to this country, and then all of a sudden, because this country doesn't have, I don't know, the law and order or the structure or something like we do here in the United States, that money's not just being kind of dispersed in a way that the person that donated it originally would not approve with. So you're talking about the local partners in these countries, the agronomists who've gone to college, they understand those specific crops. Are these the people that are handling and distributing the money and using it to get the resources they need?
Yeah, so our local partners receive the money. What's really kind of unique with Growing Hope Globally is on our website, you have a list of every single program that we're supporting. Our supporters are able to read through and see exactly what the program is trying to accomplish. And if people are curious, we're always happy to share with them program reports, or even the full budget so they can see, exactly how cash is being used. We try and be as transparent as possible. What's nice is we're a small organization, so at this point we're able to manage that pretty effectively. But in regards to your question, so the money comes to us. We then send it to the international partner that's implementing the program. First of all, we only work with partners that we trust and that are recommended to us, that have been, sort of given the seal of approval by other organizations. And then also we ask for audited financial reports every 6 months. So we're able to be really confident that, if the money is being sent somewhere, it's being put to the purposes that it's said to. And then, of course, the ultimate transparency is when I go and visit any of these programs, you're welcome to come with me,
Sure.
So that helps as well. Obviously, COVID has changed our travel patterns quite a bit, but typically we would be visiting every program roughly once every 3 years. So we'd be able to see, are things progressing the way that you would expect over that period of time. And to be honest, I think in 20 plus years funding hundreds of these programs, I might be off on this number, but I think there's been 7 times where we've had to shut down a program because we weren't 100% confident that funds were being used the way we expected.
Okay.
But in general, we kind of feel like if we have to ask, we probably shouldn't be working with that partner to begin with, right? So.
Okay. Now, you at the beginning of the interview, you talked about some statistics, worldwide statistics on people who are farming or involved in agriculture. Can you give us those numbers again, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so globally, there's 690 million hungry people. That was at the start of 2020. We're now in 2021. Unfortunately, with COVID-19, both from the pandemic and government responses to the pandemic, we're expecting to see people that are in extreme hunger. We're expecting to see that number double. I think it's supposed to rise to about 270 million people being in extreme hunger this year. 4 out of 5 of those people live in rural areas or are farmers. So they're trying to grow crops, right?
Okay.
Unfortunately, in Central America right now, there's some widespread crop failure that we're expecting to see increase hunger. Hurricanes Eta and Iota recently hit there back in November, and Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, some of the places that we're working received over 40 inches of rain in a 1-week span. And in a place where some of the hills or fields are at a 60-degree slope, you can imagine the amount of damage that erosion does. So, so there's some really big challenges out there that we're working on. Most of the places that we're working are very remote, very rural, have limited road access. And most of the countries where we're working in, the governments have limited resources or limited desire to work in those places where we're trying to work.
Okay.
But we feel as an organization inspired by our Christian values, we're really called to work in those difficult places. And because we're oftentimes one of the few organizations working there, it means that things that we would consider really small things can make a really significant difference. On average, it costs us about $11 to provide a person with training for an entire year. And right now, we just recently funded a program in Nicaragua in a dry corridor called Esteli. And families there are looking for help with crop diversification. They've had back-to-back years of drought. And so they just need access to seeds that are a little more drought resistant, a little more drought tolerant. They're looking for help diversifying their crops to things that maybe don't need as much water, right? So looking at sorghum. They wanted training on some green manure practices to incorporate more organic material into the soil. The more organic material you get, the more moisture you're able to retain. And then the other thing they wanted was help setting up local community savings boxes, right? They said, some of us really love farming. Not all of us are going to be farmers. We have some good ideas for small businesses that we could get going, but none of us have the cash to get anything going. And if they were to borrow money from a local lender, they might pay as much as 18% interest compounded monthly. And there's few small businesses that generate enough revenue in their first years, right, to cover that kind of interest. And so what we're doing is we're not putting any money into it. It's their own savings. but we're encouraging them to start their own savings clubs where each member pays in a small amount each month, and then they'll choose a proposal from one of their members to give that money to for them to be able to have the startup capital to get something going.
Okay.
So that's just an example from one program, but again, these aren't huge pipe dream type projects, right? We're not trying to establish thousands of acres of a crop or trying to introduce something radically different from what people are already doing. It's just that a lot of time, they just don't have that person to give them a hand up. And that's what we're really trying to do.
Okay. Now, you had mentioned a percentage at the outset, and I wanted to get back to that. Did you say that 80% of the world's population is involved in farming? Was that
80% of the world's hungry people, or people suffering from hunger,
okay,
are involved in farming or live in rural areas.
Okay. And then when we say they're involved in farming, I mean, I think, unless I'm misunderstanding, I think we need to adjust our perspective on that. We're talking like basically subsistence farming, not anything like what we're used to here in the United States.
Yeah. So, for example, from Central America, I'm the Latin America guy. We have people that work in Africa and also Asia, but I'm Latin America, so that's where all my stats are from today.
Okay.
But for example, the average farmer that we're working with in Guatemala right now would farm 1 to 2 acres, and his average corn yields would be between 15 and 20 bushels per acre. So that gives you a sense of the room for improvement that's possible.
Oh yeah, my goodness.
The other side of it is, the majority of their fields, like I said earlier, are on a 60-degree slope. So mechanization isn't necessarily going to be the answer there, right? It's looking at some simple practices.
Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I mean, you've laid a great foundation for what you do and why you do it, or why Growing Hope Globally does what it does. Let's bring it back to the U.S. for a second. Let's talk about the supervised agricultural experience and explain to everybody how you are involved with the FFA.
Yeah, so we're really excited about this. This is something new that we just launched back in October. For the last several years, we've been reaching out to FFA chapters and FFA instructors, encouraging them to partner with the growing projects that are already in their community. And what we kept hearing back from the instructors was, this is a great idea, but I'm already really busy as an FFA instructor. I don't know if there's any teachers that really work harder than them. But the other end of it is, it's really hard to help students that maybe live in a small town to connect with some of these global issues if they haven't had the opportunity to travel themselves.
Okay. So
they asked us if we wanted to design a curriculum to help introduce the topic in the classrooms. That's what we've done. We've partnered with NASAE and FFA instructors to develop a curriculum that covers 5 different foundational SAE components. So it's looking at agricultural literacy, career exploration, personal finance, workplace safety, and employability. And so it kind of covers those 5 different pieces with activities and ideas for how to look at the topic of international agricultural development through those lenses and get the students through those different projects. The final part of it is an experiential SAE that the students are able to do, where they work to get set up with a project that supports families in developing countries like I've been talking about. So we have an FFA chapter in Belmond-Clemmy FFA chapter, which is in, I think they're in Clemond, Iowa, but it's right between the 2 towns.
Okay.
It's a smaller school. And one of the students had her dad donate a few acres of land, and he reached out to his landlord and got a few more acres donated to the project once they explained what they were doing. Other students in the class reached out to input dealers in town to get the seed corn donated, or the corn seed donated. And then they worked with the farmer throughout planting, helped with the chores of planting, helped with the chores of spraying throughout the summer, and then worked at harvest time and then sold it to the local elevator. And were then able to determine where they wanted to send those funds overseas.
Okay.
And what's great is we've we've developed a few different resources for classrooms to be able to easily do this by developing kind of examples or guidelines, almost checklists of how to do these projects, whether it's field crops, a dairy model, livestock, a farmer's market. Even we're right now working on some alternative crop models as well if people want to work with fruit crop farmers or something like that. So
Okay.
what's great for a busy FFA instructor is, here's something that they can either take and use off the shelf in part or in whole to really meet some of those SAE requirements.
Okay. And the chapters do this as one unit?
Yeah, so that's what's kind of unique about the model. It can either be an individual SAE or it can be a classroom SAE. Just kind of depends on the interests of the students.
Okay.
They can opt in or opt out. But there's enough work to be done throughout the year that either a student could do this on their own. Maybe mom or dad runs a livestock operation and they have a way of just plugging into that existing livestock operation.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of FFA students that maybe don't have that direct connection to the farm. And so as a classroom model, it's kind of nice in that you can do this where, you have the one group of students working on some of the farming pieces, maybe another group of students working on some of the communications or outreach pieces. And it's a way for students to kind of develop career skills in the area that they're most interested in, right?
Okay.
I think that there's just a tremendous value for high school students learning how to pick up a phone and call somebody that owns another business or write a letter and send it out. I think we just don't do that personal interaction enough. There's some really good skill development pieces in it as well.
Okay. And so the curriculum that you developed, how does this, I guess, what does it teach the students as they go through? I mean, from a very simplistic standpoint, they're going to get somebody to help donate some land, some livestock, whatever. They're going to sell it. They're going to get the inputs donated. They're going to then donate that money to another part of the world that needs the help. So I guess, and I don't mean to be crass, but what do they need the curriculum for?
Yeah, I mean, it's so the curriculum kind of helps walk them through some of the other specific pieces, right? So, for example, with ag literacy, it kind of walks them through an activity on how to learn about agriculture in other countries and look at what some of the challenges might be facing farmers in other countries. And they do kind of a compare and contrast with American farms, right? So, kind of helping them understand, okay, there's some real similarities here, right? Like moisture and soil quality and all those things matter no matter where you're farming, but there's some really big differences too. With the career exploration piece, I think a lot of people aren't even aware that international agricultural development's an option for them. I think there's people that both love farming and both love being a little nomadic or maybe have a bit of the travel bug.
Yeah.
And this is a great way to be able to go and see other places and make a significant difference. So that's where the curriculum's really helpful. We have the examples available for kind of some of those different experiential models. Just because we've been doing this for 20 years, sometimes it's nice to have a checklist to run through to make sure you're not missing different pieces. But with that experiential SAE, it does give students the opportunity to have some hands-on experience with the farming pieces of it. And I think what's interesting is at the end of the project, the marketing piece is always kind of the part that locks the students' attention in. Okay, we raised $7,000 or $8,000, right? Like that's a significant amount of money for a high school chapter to be thinking about using in a philanthropic way. And when they make their donations, every chapter that I've visited with, they've usually done more research on the different programs than I have sometimes. I mean, they really want to make sure that they're investing in the program that's going to make the biggest difference. And I think that's a great learning opportunity for students.
Okay.
And, it also encourages to ask some of the same questions that you've been asking today. How do we know that the money's going to be used well?
Sure.
How do we know that we're going to get the most bang for our buck? And, those are things that students should be asking. Those are things that they should be thinking about. So that's where the curriculum comes in. Also, we have a cohort starting for students that want to be involved in the experiential project. They can contact us, let us know, and we'll have a monthly cohort starting towards the end of January. so that they can connect with other chapters doing this across the country and get questions answered and also share ideas of different new and innovative things that they're taking. I mean, we work with about 150 communities across the U.S. that are doing this, and each one's doing it a little differently, just like every farming operation's a little different, And so it's great to be able to connect people and have them share some of those different ideas that they have.
Okay. Is there a separate name for the curriculum, or is it referred to as Growing Hope Globally? How can people find out about this and incorporate it?
Yeah, so it's available both on the FFA SAE website. And I'm sorry, I should have that jotted down, but I don't have it jotted down in front of me.
It's okay.
They can also go on to growinghopeglobally.org. We have an entire page dedicated to FFA resources. They'll find the curriculum there. They'll find an overview video of what we do. They'll find the examples, and then they'll also have the opportunity to join us for some of the different events that we do throughout the year.
Okay. All right. Well, Alex, let me ask you this. So with the SAE portion, with the FFA involvement, have any of these students, have they been able to travel internationally and kind of see firsthand what their efforts are going to?
Yeah, as we were first getting started on this, we had a chapter of FFA students in Bloomfield, Nebraska, travel with me down to Nicaragua. We were able to visit a couple of different programs. We were able to visit one that's way up in the mountains, visited coffee farmers, cacao plantations, and it's an area really exposed to climate change. It's in Nicaragua's dry corridor. And so farmers had been looking at their farming practices and looking at their planting date. And over a 10-year period, their planting date had shifted by an entire month because the rains were arriving so late. And then when the rains did arrive, instead of being a nice kind of even dispersion of rain, it was all coming in a single day. There was a farm that we visited where they said, look, we got all of the month's rain October 6th, and then no rain the rest of the month, right? And so that leads to erosion, it leads to soil deterioration. It makes it really hard to grow a decent crop. And so what the farmers were doing was they were looking at alternative crops that they could grow, right? One of them is cassava. Cassava is planted in a lot of places across Africa and in the Caribbean. And it's kind of a unique plant in that it has a big tuber that's underground, but the tuber can be harvested at any time after it's reached maturity. So you can leave the crop in the ground for 6 months to a year, depending on the variety, without it spoiling, which is awesome in a place where you don't have refrigeration. So they were working with cassava. It's also drought tolerant. They were working with growing plantains. I think we often think of plantains or bananas as being a crop that might need a lot of water, but actually, because they have those big canopies and those big leaves, it actually shades the soil quite a bit and helps retain moisture. And then instead of growing some of the local varieties of red beans, they were promoting a variety of pigeon pea that was also, again, a little more drought tolerant and nitrogen fixing. So all those things together kind of help build soil health. They were also encouraging farmers to plant cover crops to protect the soil, build it up over time. And I think the one part that stayed with all of us was this one farmer named Douglas that we met. And I was kind of playing devil's advocate, right? The students were asking questions. I was asking questions. Finally, I just asked them, Douglas, wouldn't it be easier if we just gave you the food? All this planting, all this breaking the ground, this sounds like a ton of work. He kind of thought about it for a bit. And he said, I think this is better that you train me because nobody can take it away from me. And if I'm waiting for you to send me food every month,
right?
What happens if you decide to send it somewhere else? What happens if you decide that you don't care about me anymore? They said, no, this training and teaching me how to do it myself is better because then it's mine. Nobody can take it away. So we got to meet Douglas. We got to see a water project. I think a lot of us take clean water for granted. We met a guy named Ophelio, who just shared with us that, him and his wife had always drank from the local river. That's what they did. That's what all their neighbors did. They just didn't know any different. And they didn't know that it wasn't common to be just totally laid up in bed, sick to your stomach a couple of weeks every year. They just didn't they just didn't realize that. And so through the program, they got an opportunity to test their water, see that the water was dirty, and then the community worked together to get a well built. So Filio actually donated the land, his own land, in order to build a community well to help out his neighbors. So I haven't gotten to connect with those FFA students. That was a couple of years ago. I haven't really connected with them since they went off to college and got busy with things. But I have a hard time imagining that those stories haven't stuck with them the same way that they've stuck with me.
Sure. All right, just a little tangent. I do this every now and then. That cassava, is that poisonous if you don't prepare it the right way? Am I thinking of the right thing?
So I believe the leaves are poisonous if it's not prepared properly.
Okay.
And I think it's the mature leaves, and I think there's a way of preparing them so that it's not toxic. There's an arsenic level in the leaves.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I think there's something you can do, like boil them and then discard the water and boil them again, something like that. Same with the pigeon peas.
All right. Well, let's switch gears one more time. So I wanted to go back to this statistic. Okay, so 80% of the world's population, world's poor. They are farming. It's mostly subsistence farming. So with that said, I just want to contrast that to the United States of America, where less than 2% of our entire population is producing way more food than we even actually need. More calories anyway than we need per person in the United States. So it's a very interesting contrast. But with that said, we have a ton of knowledge here about agriculture in the United States, and there are opportunities for people. It may be a new stage of life, maybe it's a retirement plan, who knows what it is, to go internationally and help people to get better at subsisting and then maybe even improving their standard of living beyond that by selling excess crops. When my wife and I bought our farm, I did a lot of research and I sought out a real estate agent who really knew farming. And I found a great real estate agent, but there was one problem, and that was about every 6 weeks he flew to Africa and helped people learn about farming and developing small businesses in agriculture and things like that. And I say that tongue in cheek. It's awesome what he did, but we lost, as we're looking for a farm, we lost our real estate agent about every 6 weeks for about a 3-week period. But anyway, those opportunities do exist. Can you speak to that a little bit, both through what you do and through Christian-based organizations? But I'm assuming you bump elbows with organizations that are going out and doing this that are not Christian-based or even religious-based. Can you speak to that for a second?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different backgrounds that organizations come from. A lot of people are doing some really great work. There's some good organizations that do long-term mission placement for people interested in doing ag mission. And if that's your skill set and where your heart is, I really encourage you to consider doing it. I had the opportunity to live overseas for a year in the Dominican Republic, and then I actually worked about 7 months in the Haiti earthquake response, lending the expertise that I had at the time, or the willingness to at least be in a difficult place for the time being. And they're life-changing experiences. So if that's where your heart is, and if you're able to dedicate a year or two to that, or really be able to do a long-term investment of your time and energy, like your real estate guy is doing, that's awesome. We recognize, though, that not everybody's able to just take off for a month at a time or a couple of months at a time, right? And so we provide an opportunity for people to make a difference from right where they are. With the FFA students that we're hoping will get involved, our big hope is they'll either travel with us or during college, do a study abroad, travel with a mission organization, do something to get out there and see what's going on in other parts of the world. And if there's a place where you're feeling called, or that you have a gift that you can give to make a difference, then by all means go for it. And it's not just necessarily agriculture, right? I mean, I think a lot of us are thinking farming right now, but there's a friend I have that's worked with a number of businesses down in Peru, just helping businesses learn how to balance the books, how to keep records of what's income and what's expense, and looking at how profitable things are and kind of figuring out what's my best selling item. So there's all kinds of skills that we have. I'm personally motivated by my faith. I think that all of us are given God-given gifts and talents, and there's ways for us to go out and share those. By all means, that's what we should be doing. What I like about Growing Hope Globally's model is, some of our American farmers, what they're really great at is growing corn or soybeans in Iowa, or growing crops wherever they are, raising livestock, right? So this is a way for them to take what they're already doing and make a global difference. And a lot of the time they're making a difference for people that they might never meet, but generally, there's a chance they might get to hop on a plane one day. We had a guy, Kevin Skunas, he's the former president of the National Corn Growers Association, traveled with me down to Nicaragua, and I don't think he had ever really imagined what it would be like to go down there and meet people that he had helped. Right? He had been helping this program down in Nicaragua because they were working on water quality, and he thought water is important. And we got to go down there and see the well that people were using, and hear the story of somebody that said, before this, my kids were all sick, they were all malnourished. My daughter would be 6 months old and unable to lift her head, and now we don't have those problems. And it was a powerful experience for them. So I think it's up to each person to really think about, what are the talents that you have that you can share with the world, and hopefully find a way to dedicate some time to do that, whether it's a year at a time, a couple of days at a time, an hour each day, however that fits into your life.
Yeah, that's fantastic and a great point. Well, Alex, this has been great. What's the burning question that you were dying to answer that I didn't ask you? Is there anything I've left out?
I think the only question that you've left out is like, how can people get involved, or how can people look us up online, right?
Oh, that one was coming. Okay, so how can people find you? People want to get more involved. They want to donate. However they want to be involved, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so the best way to learn more is to go to our website, growinghopeglobally.org. I'm really happy to share. I think this is good timing for this interview because on Tuesday, January 12th at 6:30 p.m., we actually have a Zoom conversation. So open to anyone that's interested in learning more.
Okay.
I'll be sharing some of the same stuff that I shared today, but we just kind of cover what it is that we do as an organization and encourage people to ask questions or raise concerns about what it is we're doing, or gives us a chance to also just share more about what piques people's interest, right? Some people, like you had asked me a little bit ago about cassava, right? Like some people just have these questions, and we're happy to have a venue to be able to answer them in. So that's 6:30 p.m. on January 12th, 6:30 p.m. Central Time.
Central. Okay. And then so that's in 4 days. If folks who aren't able to make it at that time, is it going to be posted somewhere where they could watch it after the fact?
It actually won't be posted after the fact, but it's something that we do on a monthly basis.
Okay.
So again, if you go to our website, growinghopeglobally.org, or if you follow us on social media, you'll see kind of our monthly reminder that our upcoming Get to Know Growing Hope Globally session is coming up. So that's probably the best way to join us. We also have an in-depth webinar on January 14th at 7:30 p.m. looking at how do we build resilience in communities in developing countries, right? So this year has just been incredibly difficult on smallholder farmers, right? You had the COVID pandemic, and then and you had government shutting down farmers markets, so they weren't able to sell their crop. They had tremendous amounts of crop go to waste because they couldn't eat it all at once. Didn't have storage for it. And then in November, like I mentioned a little earlier, you had Hurricane Eta and Iota come in and wipe out their second crop of the year. And so we have a guest speaker from Argentina that's been working in development work for over the last 20 years. He's worked in response to a number of major disasters. He's going to be looking at what are our programs doing in the long term to make sure that communities are able to bounce back when that happens. How can we make sure that they don't go all the way back to square one when there's something like that happens, and really talk about the value of training over time. So a couple of great ways to get to know more about our organization if your interest is piqued.
Great. Well, Alex, thank you so much for what you and everybody there at Growing Hope Globally does, and thank you so much for sharing it with all of us today, too. I think it's really valuable.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for being here, everybody, and thank you to Alex Morse, not just for reaching out, but for everything he and all of his colleagues there at Growing Hope Globally are doing. We get caught in our bubble here in the U.S., and we don't realize what's going on out there in the rest of the world. And it's great that people are doing that, and more of us really should get involved. And thank you for all being here, everybody, and we would love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just hit that subscribe button there. And hey, after you do that, if you'd like to connect with us otherwise, we're all over social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We would love to connect with you in all of those places. And hey, until next time, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.